we can't do business the way we've been doing it for 100 years because the world is changing around us. We are more global than we've ever been in the past. The demographics, even in our own communities, are changing. More Hispanic and Latinos in the US are starting their own businesses. More Asian Americans are starting their own businesses. More Black Americans are starting their own businesses. So the landscape is shifting.
Yeah.
And if we only do business the way we did it 100 years ago, we are missing out. I'm Amy C. Waninger, and this is the future of insurance.
This episode is brought to you by Medallia, the market leader in customer and employee experience. Their award-winning SaaS platform, Medallia Experience Cloud, makes all your other applications customer and employee aware. Medallia uses proprietary AI and machine learning to reveal predictive insights that track powerful business actions and outcomes. Leading insurers like the Hartford and Farmers use Medallia to reduce churn, turn detractors into promoters, create in-the-moment cross-sell and upsell opportunities, and drive revenue-impacting business decisions. Learn more at Medallia.com. And the Future of Insurance book series, available exclusively from Amazon or at future-of-insurance.com.
Amy Waninger, thank you so much for joining me today for the podcast. I'm really excited this is our third attempt to record this all on me. But I'm excited to actually dig into this with you. So thank you.
I'm excited too. Thanks, Bryan.
I will admit that folly that it's like, I can't record today. I'm sorry. And you were very gracious about it and still gave me the time. Third time's a charm.
Yeah.
You have a background in insurance, but your focus is not, yes, you do work in insurance today. Still, you work with insurers and people in the industry, but you have a much broader remit. You're looking at the DEI question, the DEI purpose that a lot of people have sort of taken on, and trying to make that more embedded and more of really how we operate. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that journey for yourself. And then I want to talk about, why does this matter? What's the implications of it? How do we get this right? Because the cost of not doing it and the benefits of doing it are pretty profound.
Yeah. So I didn't start out in diversity, equity, and inclusion, although one could argue that I tried to. So just as a quick backstory on me, I grew up in a place where people did not go to college and then move back home. So I didn't know people who went to college. When I went to college, I didn't know what I was doing there.
Yeah.
And I took classes that were interesting to me. And I knew that teachers, doctors, and lawyers went to college, and that was about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be a teacher, so I took that out. That left me with doctor and lawyer. I didn't pass organic chemistry, so that left me with lawyer.
Yeah.
And I got the idea somewhere in my head that I would someday work for the ACLU.
Okay.
Because I really loved their mission. I read about them somewhere and I thought, oh, that would be a great job.
Did you know about them before college, or is that where you?
No, like in college, I read about them. And so I was majoring in criminal justice, African-American studies with minors in sociology and Spanish. And my senior year, I learned how much law school was going to cost.
Yeah.
And I learned what pro bono meant. And that took out lawyer.
Yeah. Those two things don't add up.
They do not, not unless you go in with, really good coffers to begin with. And I didn't. So, I went ahead and graduated with that degree, and I was really overqualified for the job at the mall that I had while I was working my way through school. And somebody at some point suggested that I go back to school for computer science. So I did. I took what I call my 20-year detour in my career in IT. And that's how I landed in the insurance industry. In 2012, I believe it was, the company that I was working for was a major insurance carrier. They hired a chief diversity officer.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to read what this was about. And I read the job description. I was like, oh, that sounds fun. And then I started reading all of the things that this person was going to be doing. And I was really excited. And I started volunteering for anything they would let me go to, I would go to. Anything they would let me do, I would do, on top of my day job. And what I was really trying to figure out is, how do I move from where I am to that department or that role? And there really wasn't a clear path. I mean, it's hard to get from IT to diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time volunteering and just kind of nosing my way in. And then about that same time, I started going to conferences, and I was frustrated because when I would go to the diversity and inclusion sessions at the conferences,
Yeah.
I didn't walk away with any notes about what I could do
Hmm.
because I wasn't in a position to change anything, globally or for my company,
Yeah.
writ large. So I decided to try to solve for, well, what could I do? If I were going to do something from where I sit, if I were going to change something for myself or for the people around me, what would that look like? And I decided to pitch that to a conference, and they said yes. And then I had to figure it out because I had a deadline, which is how all good things happen, accidents and deadlines. And so what I came up with was my book, Network Beyond Bias, which is I published in 2018. And it really just kind of breaks down, like, who do you need in your network? And oh, by the way, isn't our network the best place for us individually to demonstrate our commitment to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah.
As it turns out, there was a real audience for this message. And so in 2019, I actually left the insurance industry to do this work full time.
Can I pause on the title for a second? Because
Yes.
I think it's worth everyone who's listening to just think about for a minute. When we talk about this industry, we always say like, oh, it's a relationship business. Like we either say it's a people business or it's a relationship business because we don't have a tangible product. So that means it's a networking business. And the other thing we say is like everyone knows everyone because they all go around the same companies, worked at the same brokers and same carriers. And so it is 100% a network business. And by extension, it tends to be a network of similarity. So you see like, who does the broker go to the bar with from the carrier? It's people that look and seem and feel and have backgrounds similar to them generally. Who do go on the golfing trips and it's if you look around, and there's been some change in this, but historically in our industry, it's a networking business that is reinforcing the sameness because we tend to network with those who are like us because it feels more comfortable. It's more natural. And so we're perpetuating this very much. And it's not just insurance, but it's like amped up in our business because it is such a networking focused business, especially when you move into commercial lines and some of the more risk engineered spaces where it's not as transactional. And so those relationships matter. And it's like fueling the sameness over and over again.
Absolutely. And, the problem with that, and I know we're going to get into kind of the future, but the
Yeah.
problem with that, even right now, is we can't do business the way we've been doing it for 100 years because the world is changing around us.
Yeah.
We are more global than we've ever been in the past. National borders don't mean what they used to mean in terms of business, if they mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
The demographics, even in our own communities, are changing. More women own, talking about commercial, more women own businesses
Yeah.
than in the past. Women are starting businesses at a really high rate relative to men, or relative to, historical trends. More Hispanic and Latinos in the US are starting their own businesses. More Asian Americans are starting their own businesses. More Black Americans are starting their own businesses. So the landscape is shifting.
Yeah.
And if we only do business the way we did it 100 years ago, we are missing out. I've talked to agents a few times and said, look, if 80% of insurance agent principals are white men and only 40% of business owners are white men, you've got 80% of your agents competing for 40% of the market,
Yeah.
which means you've got
Can't really
60% of the market that's relatively uncontested space.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
Right.
Right?
It's a feeding frenzy for a shrinking pool. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And definitely not just insurance, but this is an industry where all of those dynamics are heightened because of the interpersonal nature of it. There's the
Yes.
scaling through technology in a lot of these these interaction-based, relationship-based situations. It's person to person.
And let's face it, the stakes are higher in insurance because at the end of the day, insurance makes all economic investment possible. And we're there for people on their worst day.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, who will?
Yeah.
And it's not that people who are underrepresented in our industry don't have assets worth protecting, don't have dreams worth insuring.
Yeah.
Right? It's that they don't have access to the people in the industry, the experts in the industry that can help them protect those dreams and assets.
Yeah.
And it ends up meaning that a lot of people are underinsured, which is a twofold problem for the industry, right? Because it's lost market opportunity, but we know the impacts of insurance in communities, and it really quickly becomes an ethical problem as well.
Yeah. Well, and when you go to adjudicate their claims, if we have efforts to try to support minority-owned businesses on the loan side, why aren't we doing that on the claim side to make sure that there's equity in how those claims are being adjusted? There's a discussion, Abel Travis posted something about, whether claims are settled fairly when you factor in the race, the ethnicity, the minority status, whatever it is that isn't, the white male owned business or personal lines. Are those claims being handled as fairly and to to the same sort of outcome as if someone wasn't of a minority or a person of color? Obviously, lots of heated debate around that, but there is data behind it. There's definitely evidence about it, and then there's people who have lived it. So, we support in the building of the business, or we have institutions in place to try to help support in that. Obviously, more progress can be made there. We also need to make sure when tragedy strikes, we take a similar tone to try to support the rebuilding of those businesses, of those lives, of those homes, those, whatever that insurance is supposed to be there for.
Absolutely. Insurance is in the business of selling trust. And if marginalized communities don't trust your promises, you've got more work to do.
Yeah. So I was thinking about like the recycling story when you were talking about your early days and seeing this and saying, well, what can I do? And it's like, well, you should still recycle, but that's not going to save the world, just what you're doing. It's the sum total. But how did you, when the book came out and you started to do work with other organizations, how did you get to a place where you're not just taking care of, the trash that's coming out of your home, but the broader piece of it? So how do you make this message broader and have that broader impact that starts to move the needle?
Yeah. So I tend to work mostly with emerging and aspiring leaders, because emerging and aspiring leaders are the future of our industry, and they are less vested in the way things have been than than people with more tenure or people for whom the system has worked very well, right? And so I tend to focus on people who are still trying to figure this out, because I feel like, if we can course correct a couple of degrees, we can change where they end up. And also, if people are in the habit of lifting as they climb, different people will rise to the top than have in the past. And that's not necessarily a dig on the people who have risen to the top, right? The system's set up the way it is, right? People get where they are because of their connections, and those connections have been very exclusive for a very long time. So trying to break that up, in some of the lower echelons of the business community, where it can have the most long-term potential impact, is really important to me. Although, even though I say I set out to talk to people, who are emerging and aspiring leaders. So, aspiring leaders, frontline managers, middle managers. I was at a smaller company outside the insurance industry just before COVID started, before the lockdowns and travel stopped, when we were still doing in-person events.
Yeah.
And I did a lunch and learn with them, and I went through the assessment tool that I use to help people figure out who's in your network. Because once you've done the assessment and you see on paper how you're really doing, and that was the turning point for me, was seeing it on paper and realizing that I wasn't doing what I thought I was doing with my networking efforts. We can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
but once you see it on paper, it's kind of hard to ignore. And I didn't know it at the time, but the CEO of the company was in my session. And I talked to the woman who had hired me. She was the director of HR. I talked to her a couple weeks later. I said, just wanted to follow up, see, how things are going,
Yeah.
what kind of feedback you heard after the session. And she said, well, our CEO keeps that card. I do the assessment on a postcard. He keeps that postcard on his desk so that every time he goes into a meeting, he looks at it and has to think about who's in the room, who's not in the room,
Yeah.
whose voices am I listening to?
Yeah.
And it was kind of at that moment that I realized, oh, right, this message is bigger than the who I intended it for.
Yeah.
And it really can speak to anyone who's willing to kind of open their mind and listen to it. And as far as, how do you spread this? I've done this talk um, hundreds of times now in the last 3 years. I've sold thousands of copies of the book. I've been to big companies, small companies, international associations, local chambers of commerce, everywhere in between. And I really think that, again, it's, if we can grassroots at scale,
Yeah.
we can really make some changes. That isn't the only work I do. Of course, I do, consulting with executives as well to help them kind of, change their culture, change their policies and procedures in their companies to make things more equitable, to make, to open up opportunity to more people. So it's a both and, it's not an either or.
Sure. Sure. Well, and you need the people at the senior levels who own the budget and the decision making to be bought in,
Mhm.
so that you can build out the next level, which is the future leadership for that company and beyond, because generally things get tighter at the top, so fewer people stay, and those people who leave branch out and become the leaders elsewhere. So it's like the draft pick for a sporting team. Like, that's not necessarily going to be your best player right now or the team captain, but you're investing in what will be the way that this team plays down the road.
Right.
Take out the politics of professional sports and contracts and all that, but in theory, at least. So you're doing all this for the right now, but it's about what happens down the road. So what are some of the benefits that come when people do open up, aside from it being the right thing to do, which it is, for those people who are like, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's good business. It is good business.
It is
There's
good
data behind
business.
that. So maybe you can share some of the reasons why actually this should matter to you, whether you're a numbers person or a hard person or a mix of the two.
Yeah. So, going back to the demographic shifts, right? We are seeing changing demographics, which means that our market opportunities, are changing, right? The mix of customers is changing. The trajectory of that is steeper, right, than it has been in the past. The pace of change is faster as we look forward. We're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube on globalization.
Yeah.
Right. And especially if you look at the last year with COVID, we see how democratized technology has become to the point where, everybody lives in our computer. Well, when everybody lives in your computer, you can talk to people everywhere.
Yeah.
There's almost in the last year, geography hasn't meant anything,
Yeah,
right?
it's irrelevant.
And so if you think about that on a global scale, think about, economies that are underinsured that are emerging.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, places where there's an emerging middle class and there's going to be more consumerism. People are going to want to invest their money differently. They're going to want to start their own businesses. Um, you know, the way, just every aspect. Insurance touches every part of our society, every part of our economy, and should touch just about every person on the planet, right? So every change that happens has a ripple effect for the insurance industry
Mm.
and vice versa. And a lot of times, insurance gets to play a role in what gets funded in the first place. So there's a remarkable opportunity for the insurance industry to put its weight behind the acceleration of these changes in terms of equity, in terms of, what kinds of energy investments we make, what kinds of public policies we have. There's just so much opportunity here right now to create the future that we want.
Yeah.
And then also to be poised to ensure it.
Yeah. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the diversity of thought that comes from having a more diverse group of people, and what that can lead to, and especially for an industry that, people throw stones at us for how slow and backwards and difficult we are to work with. Lots of change going on in the industry right now. Lots of disruption from startups, new things coming. Obviously, 2020 pushed us to make a lot of changes. But a lot of the thinking is traditional. It's how we've done things for years. How does having a more diverse workforce help us evolve past that?
Yeah. So I want to be careful about the term diversity of thought,
Yeah.
because as you know, Brian, sometimes people use that in place of true diversity, right? We say, oh, well, we have, we have, 10 white guys on our board, but one of them's from the South. So we've got diversity of thought.
So we check that box.
And it's not the same. What we tend to see in a lot of organizations is, I call it the Rocket rule. It's so the Rockettes have a rule that you have to be, I think, between I don't remember the exact height, but it's like you have to be between like 5'8" and 5'11" to be a Rocket, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how good a dancer you are, it doesn't matter how talented you are, right? If you're not between 5'8" and 5'11" or whatever the numbers are, you're never going to get
same in the line. Your
in,
leg has
right?
to
Because
go to the same height.
that's
Yeah,
right.
everything's
They
to
all
be,
have to be identical.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations have a Rocket rule, but they don't publish it. They don't even know that it's there.
Yeah.
And the Rocket rule might look like, all of our executives come from Yale, or all of our executives used to be in sales,
Mhm.
or all of our executives, taught at, some university. All of our executives came up through this organization. All of our executives played golf at this golf club, right? And what happens is when you select either intentionally or unintentionally, for these kinds of rules about fit, you miss out on some really good talent.
Yeah.
Right? Ginger Rogers could never have been a Rocket because she wasn't tall enough. Wasn't that she wasn't talented enough, right?
Yeah.
So if you look around your organization and you're seeing people who are super talented, but they're just not in those executive ranks, might be time to think about, do you have a Rocket rule that you're not recognizing?
Yeah.
Now, what happens when we want somebody who checks all the boxes, right? They went to the right school, they majored in the right thing, they have the right professional background, they golf at the right country club, they, own the right house in the Hamptons, right? Whatever those things are, we want them to check all the boxes. What are we always asking people to do? Think outside the box. Well, if you spend so much time packing people into a box to make sure that they fit, you can't expect them to think around it.
Yeah.
And so what diversity gives us, and we know this from, decades of research, different work styles, first of all, matter, right? Different strengths and different passions matter because people see things differently. We all see things through a lens that's based on our experiences, our identities, just how we're wired, the values and the, kind of the environment that we grew up in. The more you vary those things on your team, the more innovative you are, the more profitable you are, and the further you can go together. And there are study after study after study that show that's a fact. Now, it's not easy at first, right? Because you have to get to know everybody.
Yeah.
You have to, you have to stretch a little bit and be a little uncomfortable at first to make space for people who are not just like you.
Yeah.
But we ask other people to do that for us all the time. So I think it's fair
Yeah.
that we do that for others as well. And, the more different perspectives you have, the more people rely on all of the tools in their toolbox that they've accumulated over time, right? If everybody has the same screwdriver, hammer, and, wrench in their toolbox, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
in what you're building. But if everybody comes with a different set of tools, well, now you've got a lot of options in how you're going to build the future.
Yeah. I'm reflecting on a number of the startups that have come into the space in the past few years, whether they're on the carrier side or providers, technology solutions. The backgrounds generally are mixed. So they're either, there's no one from insurance, but even still, they're not all from the same backgrounds, even if they're not insurance. And for those who have insurance talent, it's a mix there too. So it's not that the whole founding team are, dyed in the wool insurance folks. It's a mix of tech and insurance and, something else as well. So you've got all of these different backgrounds. There's one of the companies in my next book in particular, I'm not claiming to know the ages of the two founders, but they're not the same age or close to it. One of them was, I think he was getting married in some of the like foundational years of the idea generation for the startup. Whereas the other one, when they decided to leave their jobs and do the startups, he had 3 kids in college. So, they're like opposite ends of where they are in their personal life story. That's very different. And so like your risk appetite is totally different there. One is like, sure, why not? Let's quit our jobs and start a business. The other's like, do you understand what my like monthly education bills look like and, mortgage and all these other things? It's just his life is in a totally different place. So even that appetite for risk can lead to totally different willingnesses and ideas and aggression in pursuing things. Yeah, it's just even that little difference. And one was an insurance guy,
Yeah,
one was a venture capitalist, but still like just totally different styles.
absolutely. And, another thing that I noticed when I talk to insurance audiences in particular, although it's true across the board, but it's especially true in the insurance industry. I'll ask people, one of the first questions I ask them about their network after we go through, who's in your network or who should be,
Yeah.
and ask, well, how many people are in a different industry than you out of those 5? And it's usually a very low number. And
Yeah.
you think about all of the things that we assume about our industry from inside of it.
Yeah.
Our customers don't have those assumptions,
Yeah.
right? The people that we're partnering with, our vendors, all of the people that we work with outside of our own companies do not come with the same set of assumptions.
Yeah.
And yet we're really reluctant to network outside the industry,
Yeah. I would
which
say not even outside the industry, like PNC versus life and health, or like even life and health being together. I don't know a lot of people who do both of those things or have strong networks in both. So even within or like, well, I'm an auto guy, or I've been in property for this long, or I do specialty, like even within, we're still super siloed down.
absolutely. And silos are the beginning of the end for
Yeah.
anybody, because when you don't know what's going on outside, you can't protect yourself from it, right? You can't, you have to look around. Um, in the corporate space, I call this meerkatting, right? You're out there on the prairie looking for whatever, looking for your grubs and your stuff. But if you don't pop your head up every now and then and look around and make sure your buddies are still with you, you're going to get eaten by a hawk,
Yeah.
right? Like you've got to make sure that you know where the other players are on the field. And we are not good at that in the insurance industry. And even some of the best networkers in the industry, who shall remain nameless, but will say, well, I don't need to network outside the industry. Yes, you do. You absolutely do.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Like I have 2 very different sides in my life, and like with the self-helps, I've been putting aside my personal life, but the self-help side and the insurance side, and people kind of wonder why, to me, it's like, why wouldn't I have both of these? And they're both totally intertwined. My ability to lead and to manage was absolutely influenced by all the things that I gained from engaging in the self-help and development side. And I can bring real life business examples into the times that I'm coaching people because of my experience on the business side. We all have multiple hats that we can wear if we're willing to see that, but why not expand that out even further and just take in more inspiration?
Yeah. And great ideas come from accidents. They come from serendipity.
Yeah.
They come from the chance conversations that we have with people that don't think just like we do, and, give us some insight or something to chew on and think about that we wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, that's the act of creation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. Amy, what can someone do if they're looking at do I throw away this can or do I recycle it? Excuse me. This kind of moment right now, like, how can I make things better in my world, but how can I actually have impact? What are some of the things that someone can do? Someone maybe who's at one of those, not the CEO, next generation of leaders, or they're up and coming, and they realize, like, I need to invest in my own path. I need to be willing to raise my hand. And I also need to be willing to, as you said, like, lift as you climb.
Yeah, I think the most important thing people can do is change who you're around. Make sure that you have as robust, as diverse, as inclusive a network as possible. Because new ideas come from new places. And, if you, right now we're all stuck at home still, at the time that we're recording this. Hopefully by the time this interview sees the light of day, we'll be out a little bit. But, social media, again, everybody lives in your computer, so you can access anyone, right? Yeah. Change who you follow on social media. Add to who you follow on social media. Read books by different people. Read or listen to podcasts by thought leaders who don't look like the people who are, in the mold of your industry necessarily. When things open up, go to chamber events that are not aligned to who you believe yourself to be, right? So if you're white, show up at the Black Chamber of Commerce. If you're not Hispanic, go to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. If you are straight, go to the Gay Chamber of Commerce. If you're a man, go to the Women's Chamber of Commerce. Show up in places where those spaces are not created for you. Yeah. It does two things. One, you get to hear people at their most candid, because when we're in a supermajority, we are very candid about the problems and obstacles that we face. But when we are in a super minority in a room, we are our most emotionally intelligent, right? Because we have to kind of sit there and process and think before we speak, in ways that we don't have to do when we're in a supermajority in the room. And so I always ask people, if you are not used to being other at work, go places where you are other and sit and listen for a very long time before you speak. You will learn so much about what's getting in the way of talented people making full contributions. And then when you're in a room where you're a supermajority, right? You're part of the vast majority of people, or you're at a table making decisions, factor in what you've learned and make changes. Yeah. That's how things change.
Yeah. Where can people get more from you? Because you have, obviously, you mentioned the consulting and the training work that you do, the development work that you do. I'll link to your book as well, your books. But then you also just came out with some courses too, so that people can engage in things regardless of where they are, what their resource levels are. So where can people find more about this stuff?
Thank you so much for asking, Bryan. So my website is leadatanylevel.com. And from there, you can find information on my books. I have online courses for emerging and aspiring leaders. I've tried to keep the prices reasonable so individuals can engage. I'm available for consulting. I do assessments and, strategic consulting, facilitation around, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I also do training and keynotes. And all of that information is available on my website.
Awesome. I will link to all of that. Amy, thank you so much for the time and for the knowledge. It's really valuable.
Thank you, Bryan.
Huge thank you to Amy for joining me for a discussion on the show. It's a really important subject, and I know it gets attention, but I'm also concerned that a lot of that attention is surface level, or it's what we're supposed to do. And I know Amy's work seeks to make the way that the DEI idea sits with you and gets taken in so much deeper, because that's really the only way it's going to make change, if we move past the surface level. So if you haven't already, check out leadatanylevel.com. More information about Amy and her company and the training, all in the show notes. Check that out. the training really is valuable. And great thing about it is, you can pop it right into your organization, deploy it right now, and it serves itself. Like, you don't need to do anything, make it available to your teams, and go from there. And it starts to move their minds so that you can engage in the issues, the conversation differently, which is so critical. So again, thank you to Amy for joining for the discussion. Thank you to Medallia for making that discussion possible, and for really holding up the show as a whole. They were a great supporter right from day one, so I appreciate that. And a reminder to subscribe to the show if you haven't already, so you never miss a conversation like the one I just had with Amy, or with any of the other thought leaders and industry executives that I've been so lucky to get to sit down with and get some thoughts from. So a thank you to Amy, to Medallia, to you, and a reminder for all of us to invest in the thought process of the change that our industry faces so that we can keep moving forward. Thanks, everyone.